is Marissa. She owns the gallery.
And we are happy that we're having something with Spencer Frazier and the Nature Conservancy. We just know that what Spencer has done, along with what they do, the works that they do, this should be really interesting. We'll have question and answers at the end, and we just want you to feel at home while you're here. Thank you. Oh yes, and how could I forget Paul?
Thanks, Marissa, and thanks to Domicile for having us here. We really appreciate it. And I'm Paul Rudnick. I'm the Senior Associate Director of Philanthropy at the Nature Conservancy in Washington State. Welcome to our evening event. This is Exploring Climate and Canvas. And for us, this is a departure. We usually have all our events at preserves or on field trips, and we usually look at our programmatic work or just the land that we own, just to understand what we do. So I want to thank Spencer. It was about a year ago when we first met, and we had a conversation about artwork and climate and his sort of contribution in this space. And he said, you know what, have you ever thought, the Nature Conservancy, to think about talking about your work and exploring like a new medium to do so? So thank you for bringing this up to us. And this is really the second time you've done this in New York. You also had an event with the Nature Conservancy.
That's very true. And thank you to you for acknowledging that art can really change people's ideas and views.
Yeah, thanks. So tonight we're joined by an artist, a TNC director, and a journalist for a conversation about climate. And I'm going to give a brief introduction of these three people right in front of you. So we have our artist, Spencer Frazier. He's a leading voice in environmental art, celebrated for his detailed paintings that capture the beauty and emotional depth of the natural world while confronting the urgent realities of global climate change. His latest exhibition, Combustion, fresh from a critically acclaimed debut in New York, delves into humanity's intricate relationship with energy consumption. Okay, and we have Jamie Strobel, my colleague at the Nature Conservancy in Washington State. She's the Director of Climate Action and Resilience. Her career in the environmental sector spans a wide background in environmental health, forestry, community organizing, youth leadership development, urban planning, tribal air quality projects, and government and policy work.
Whoa.
She's committed to systemic level impact on climate change, driven by the people most impacted, for the benefit of all communities and critical ecosystems. And we have as our moderator, Amy Harder. Amy is a TNC board member and currently the national energy correspondent for Axios. Amy's been covering energy and climate for more than 15 years. Before rejoining Axios last month, she was the founding executive editor of Cypher News, where she spent nearly 4 years leading a global team delivering solution-focused journalism on climate and energy. Okay, here's your group, and I'm going to turn it over to Spencer to start things off.
Well, thank you everybody so much for coming out on this nice evening. I was a little worried with the baseball that maybe nobody would show. But I'm very, very excited about this exhibit, and I want to tell you all about it. But let me give you a little context of how I got here. First of all, I want you to know that I never intended to be an artist, and I surely never intended to speak about environmental issues. So how did this all come to pass? Well, my real inspiration is the Japanese garden, and since I was a kid, I've loved Japanese culture, and I taught myself bonsai, and every place that I had a Japanese garden. And today I have an amazing Japanese garden with trees I've been working on for 25 or 30 years. And the Japanese garden has taught me all types of principles of art. It's taught me about composition, and about layering, and about shapes, and geometry, and color, and also the pursuit of harmony. But it also requires patience. So about 15 years ago, I decided I would paint or draw the Japanese garden in order to kind of work out problems and try to figure things out and satisfy myself in the short term what takes decades and decades. So I started to do that, and it was as if I was hit by lightning. And I realized that this is something that I have to do. And I started developing and wanting to paint these Japanese scenes and screens and all this. And while I was drawing and painting, these human elements would come up in the canvas, like sprinklers or bridges or roads. And I started literally talking to myself about the idea, is man part of nature or is man against the natural process? And that's a very interesting question. And I was developing this language, I called it the language of nature. It was very detailed and very symbolic, very colorful. And it was as if I wanted to speak in the voice of nature, be an advocate for nature. What would the animals all say if they could talk? And so I developed this unique style, and I became a storyteller. And my pieces all have these stories embedded all through them. And you know, it's gone very well. I mean, up until recently, the work was very different than this. And I had a show in New York. Before that, I had a show at the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History that was their first show on climate and art, and they chose my piece. My work opened up the U.S. government's 5th climate assessment report. It's seen by over 1 million people, and I'm right in the foreword. And so people are very interested about this. So about 18 months ago, I was in New York and I was thinking, what if I could condense all these issues down into a singular moment in time, into a phrase, a slogan, a sentence? And I kind of had an aha moment. And for me, it was that what's happening in the world today is that we're converting solid carbon into CO2, into gaseous carbon, to a huge extent. And I realized that man's relationship with energy has brought us to the brink of where we are today. And that man's mastery of fire is directly related to the rise of civilization. And that led me to the fact that there isn't a people, a society, a civilization, a tribe, or a country that doesn't have the same experience with one of the 5 elements, fire. So in a way, fire is a symbol of unity for people. One people, one fire. And so that's how I started to think about this. And I had to figure out a way to portray it. And I knew that, you know, there could be images of fire and smoke, but how was I going to show it in an abstract way, in an interesting way? And I remembered that in my other work, I used the spiral. And the spiral is a very magical symbol. It's been in hieroglyphics for thousands of years, all ancient cultures. It means infinity, the mother, the center, portals to another world. I'm kind of like Gaga on the spiral thing. And so I go, that's perfect. If I could adapt that as an abstract element to show the impact of what man is doing, that I think it could be powerful. And so I started, and on my iPad, I put together this exhibit within about a week or two. And that was 18 months ago, and I've been waiting to show it to you till today. So I think it's instructive to know how it came together. And all these pieces, the whole is greater than the sum of the part. In a way, this is a symphony, which each one is a movement. We're looking at a stone from different facets, if you will. And the first one was the candle over here. And the candle is very interesting because it's ceremonial. It's been around since 3000 BC. It's totally benign, except what happens when there's 1,000 of them, 1,000,000 of them, 1,000,000,000,000 of them? So as I'm painting this, these stories we're developing, this is about scale. This is about the world's ability to absorb the effects of man, and the oceans to absorb it too. So that was the start. When I did that, I go, this could be good. The second one is this piece over here called Smokestack. And Smokestack is one of my favorites of the collection. I mean, it's gestural, it's figurative, there's magic in it, there's spirit in it, there's movement in it, but it's anchored by this man-made element, this geometric cylinder of the smokestack. And while I was exploring this idea of smokestacks, I asked the question, why do we need smokestacks? What are smokestacks? Smokestacks are iconic. I mean, they're a blight on rural America, they're symbolic of urban America. But to me, they're symbolic of getting rid of the effects of our actions. We want to disperse, dispel, and cast to the wind that which we have done. It's okay for it to be in our neighbor's yard, but not in our own. And I became kind of obsessed with smokestack. And I realized this whole exhibit could be about smokestacks because it really says something. And I was going to do a lot of different things, but each avenue could actually be an entirety of its show. So I have done more smokestacks since then, and you'll have to come up for 2026. Like I said, the last one I'll talk about, really, because we could talk all night about this, is wildfire. And wildfire is a very potent piece. And I did that after Lahaina, but before Palisades and Eaton fire. And it kind of shows the power of fire. Fire is good and bad, right? It's really benign in that effect. And I was just down in LA. It was unbelievable. I know we've all seen the pictures, but the Palisades is gone. I mean, 5,000 homes is just staggering. And there was smoke all the way down in Washington, Oregon, by Yosemite. If we looked this summer, we saw that there was major fires in Spain, Portugal, and Greece, and of course in Canada. And in Canada, does anybody know how many fires there were this summer? 100. That's a good guess. I guess 20. 750. 500 were out of control when I looked. So I think that, this piece in particular is, super relevant, as they all are, talking about different things in the power of flame, the power of the match, the lighter. A singular match can burn down the forest. It's really a fascinating thing, how this relationship with energy has manifested itself. So the other thing I wanted to say was, as I've been working and thinking about the environmental things, I wanted to associate myself with an organization that I thought was the best in the business. And I did a bunch of research, and I started to talk with TNC, and I think I found them because they are a worldwide organization, one of the largest, they're one of the largest private landowners. They are science-based, they are efficient, and they're a multiplier in terms of what they do with other organizations. So it's great for me to be here. It's an honor for me to be here with TNC here in my hometown.
Thank you.
Great, well, thank you so much for that, Spencer, and we will be getting into a lot more of what you were talking about earlier. So, as Paul said, I work at Axios, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation. We'll talk amongst ourselves for the first little bit and then throw it out to you for questions. So please be thinking of things you'd like to ask. And I want to say a big thank you to Marissa and my colleagues at TNC and all of you for spending part of your evening with us tonight. And I must say, it's a real treat to be hearing from Spencer and talking about this. My day job is covering energy and climate change under this current economic and political landscape, which is challenging, and for many concerned about climate change, deeply dispiriting. So I think it's nice to be able to have a moment like this where we're putting it into a more artistic and meaningful context. And Spencer, so with that, I want to come back to you with a question. You talk about how part of what drove you to do this set of work is because fire is a sense of unity. What about this moment has caused you to want to focus on that at a time when unity seems to be pretty elusive?
Yeah, we're at a really difficult time, as you all know. I mean, we're at a tipping point in history for the planet, and I think there's no more important issue or important thing to talk about. In order to solve the problems, there has to be a cohesive, group of everybody, and that's kind of the part with unity, is that if we're not all together in this, we're never going to get there. And that's the problem, because we don't have unity in this country, let alone unity across the seas and the airways with other countries. So I'm really concerned about it, which I guess is why I'm doing it.
Yeah, that's great. I want to come back a little bit on that, but first, Jimmy, I want to turn to you. You know, we've heard from Spencer, the artist, about how he's showing what motivates him through his art. What's your version of art, and what is motivating you right now with your work on climate for TNC?
My version of art. Well, I think of myself as a storyteller as well, but just in a different context and a different meaning, right? And so I think what drives me around climate is I'm originally from Hawaii, from the island of Oahu, but I've been in the Seattle area for about 20 years or so, and worked all over the region. And I have seen front and center the impacts of climate change on people's everyday lives. I used to be a youth worker, so I would run workshops with high school students and ask them, how do you see climate change impacting your life? And everyone's like, I don't know. This was like years ago. And now, in just the last 10 years, anyone who's experienced a wildfire smoke season, which wasn't a thing 10 years ago, can say that yes, it's directly impacting. The Yale Center for Climate Communications does a survey every year across the entire United States around attitudes towards climate change. And do you think it's real? Do you think are you alarmed, are you concerned, or passive, are you a denier, right? And the good news is the number of people who believe it's real and a problem has been increasing steadily over time. It is by far the majority, folks. The number that's sometimes surprising, though, is the one that has been just hit 50% recently, which is, does climate change directly impact me? And it's because part of it is we need to be better storytellers about how does this impact me, my family, the people I care about, the places I care about, the landscapes I care about. I being from Hawaii and having friends and family and folks that I know that were in Lahaina and lost their homes and lost their everything they had in those fires. I think that is such an example of not just climate change, but how climate change is a threat multiplier. It makes all of the existing things that were already there under the surface worse, right? Lahaina used to be the capital of the Hawaiian Kingdom. It used to be a wetland. It used to be very wet and verdant. And now, after centuries of land dispossession, water diversion, and agriculture, and it became very, very dry. And those impacts, those historical impacts and decisions that were made are coming back now, right? And when we have hurricanes that are coming through that are stronger hurricanes because warmer oceans, that's going to make what was originally a small spark into something much bigger. I think what's interesting about, so that's what drives me to work in climate change, but I think what's interesting about this exhibit in particular and this idea of fire is at the Nature Conservancy we work on climate from a lot of different places. We work on climate policy, we work on renewable energy, we work on forests and forest health, we work on different ecosystem restoration projects. We're both on the mitigation side and the adaptation side, but we also work on prescribed fire and looking at fire as something that is actually a tool that's been used by indigenous And again, talking about historic decisions that impact current times, part of the reason we've had these like mega fires is because of decades of U.S. Forest Service decisions to put out every single fire, to immediately put it out, because all fires were bad, right? And so we have, 70 plus years of overgrowth happening in those forests, and so we have more fuel that is naturally supposed to be there. And so when that spark starts, it's much, much bigger. We actually have some species of trees where the seeds will only start to germinate if they've experienced fire, because it's a natural part of the cycle. But in these mega fires, they burn so hot that the seeds burn up, so they don't actually germinate. So we've now are in this role where our actions as humans have changed the way that fire actually plays in the landscape. So I appreciate all of the fire talk. I wanted to play off that.
Why don't we just landscape the forest?
That's really, it's a powerful thought, because Spencer, you're talking about how fire is a uniting force going back to the earliest days of humanity, and now I think, a raise of hands, who here has been affected by a wildfire in their lives? I think everybody, 10 years ago, a lot of us might not have raised our hands, and that's due to climate change exacerbating all of these conditions, as you said, a threat multiplier. So in that way, it's also a unifying factor in a not as good way because of climate change.
Let me interject that. On the East Coast, much of the population thought that this was a West Coast problem, smoke, until, 2 or 3 years ago, when all of a sudden the Toronto fires or whatever came down, and it was covered in smoke, and all of a sudden they go, whoa, this is a national problem, and a bigger problem than just the West Coast. It was very illuminating for that.
Yeah, I found that illuminating as well, because it's hard to feel empathy for somebody until you've experienced yourself, and unfortunately it took wildfires to do that. For the East Coast, I would like to kind of go back to a different time though. I was cruising your website the other day, which I encourage all of you to do as well after tonight. And really interesting, cool photo popped up of some of your earlier work with President Biden in front of that. So would love to, I found that interesting. Kind of tell us the story behind that.
Well, it was Greenpeace Day, and he came out here, and my pieces were seen behind him, and it was really a great honor. And the funny thing was that, and the pieces are very detailed. You can go to spencerfraser.com and see that photograph. But he was getting, kind of long-winded, as he tended to do.
But more airtime for your art.
Yeah. People were saying, I got something to look at. I really enjoy it because, they had something to pass the time.
That's great. Jamie, as Spencer was just saying, climate change is not only a national U.S. problem, it's a global problem. And I know your work is focused on Washington State. Can you talk about sort of what you're doing in Washington and how this is both a global and a national problem, and how your work kind of intersects the two?
Yeah, so here in Washington, we are doing a lot of different things. I talked about some of them, but we were a big part of supporting and pushing through and improving the Climate Commitment Act that passed in 2021, which made us one of the very few states that actually puts a tax on carbon. And that money has now gone back to fund a lot of different climate projects across the state, both from a mitigation side and an adaptation side. Some of my favorite projects that are in that are we help support the Quinault tribe getting $25 million in order to buy back land on their reservations that they can now turn into a carbon project and manage more of those forests better and for improved sequestration. We also have been a part of funding wildfire resilience and getting more money out to support forest health projects. So that means like actually having forests that are healthy that we use prescribed burning on. And then we also have, projects that are out there to work with different Northwest tribes around responsible siting of renewable energy projects. How do we make sure that those are not impacting critical ecosystems, that we're respecting treaty rights and tribal sovereignty and cultural resources, because we know that the renewable energy sector is growing and we need to really transition off of fossil fuels in order to move towards more sustainable energy solutions. And we want to do that in a way that isn't going to be detrimental to both the environment or to Indigenous peoples here in Washington. We're also doing quite a lot of interesting resilience work. There's a project down in Tacoma that's looking at urban trees and forestry, and looking at the intersection of air quality and urban heats and kind of re-greening certain neighborhoods that have less tree canopy coverage than other neighborhoods. So our science team is doing some great research around that. And we were a big part in the Climate Commitment Act of ensuring that there was working with obviously a coalition and other advocates to have 35% of the funding be dedicated towards communities who have disproportionate pollution burden, and at 10% of them also going to tribes and tribal projects. So we're really leading the way in Washington, I think, about trying to ensure that we're doing good climate policy and reducing emissions, but also ensuring that funding is going towards valuable projects. I think globally, obviously I tell this when I do youth work all the time, it's like we are not an island of ourselves. We obviously interact with, our goods come from different places, our food is often shipped from different places. We are interconnected to so many different parts of the world. And then as a region, here in King County and Puget Sound, we actually are in the top 10 areas of refugee resettlement. And so we have a ton of folks who are coming here with connections to other places and other countries, and maybe bringing with them like their connections to homeland and place and loss of those places too, right? And so some of the work we're doing too is we're partnering with other states. We have a whole like Western Division, West Coast Collaborative, where we're working on sharing lessons learned around climate policy. There's a national effort around that. There's also projects that are happening to work on what we call natural climate solutions. So how can nature be a part of mitigating the greenhouse gas emissions? So we have, how do we increase sequestration potential? How do we preserve the last places that are big sinks? We have an initiative here in the Northwest that's called the Emerald Edge, which is the largest temperate rainforest is right here, spanning from Oregon up through Washington, all the way up Canada and into Alaska, that whole edge. And it's a significant carbon sink. And so we've been working with First Nations in Canada to preserve those places, have Indigenous-led conservation. We're also working in the Caribbean around mangroves and mangroves as a strategy to prevent like ocean swells and resilience and preventing land from going into the ocean, right? There's a lot of really great projects that are happening like all across the globe. So.
That's so great, and you really helped articulate sort of the unique nature of TNC with both the local and regional and global perspective, which I think is one thing that Spencer said really drew him to the organization. As a reminder, in a few minutes, we're going to throw it out to you for questions. First, we do have another type of audience participation moment, so please raise your hand if you want to participate. It doesn't involve anything scary or getting up from where you're standing or sitting. Okay. Doug and Mike. So Doug, all it is choose a piece of art on the wall that Spencer already has explained, and then he'll explain it. That's all.
Oh, the jet engine. Maybe the most difficult painting in here to execute. It looks simple, but to create curves like that is actually very, very difficult. And I came out of the aerospace industry when I was in my 20s. I went to work for Northrop in the black projects. I had one of the highest civilian clearances in the country, believe it or not. And so I was fascinated by aerospace, and I learned a lot. I became a pattern maker, machinist, a draftsman, a project manager. But I was thinking that if you could create the perfect, like, terraforming machine, it could be the jet engine, because the jet engine sucks in all this cold, beautiful, clear air, and out comes flame, pollution, and heat. And what do you get for it? You get motion, you get movement. So I kind of broke it down into that thinking, and I believe that the airlines and aerospace industry is like 10% of all CO2 emissions, something like that. And so it's a potent piece, and there's no flame like that. I mean, that was difficult to try to figure out how to paint that, and then have it be realistic, because jet engines don't have flame except if they're flaming out, which is not a good day.
Mike, I think?
Yeah.
Yeah, your choice.
The fire pit.
Yes. So this fire and that fire, the evolution of humanity was around the campfire. The campfire is responsive, and so I was thinking about it, and it's also in a way an outdated notion. We don't need today. Most of us don't need today campfire to survive. And so it kind of puts that into question. And was, both of these. I mean, I think this angle was the center of the exhibit. I mean, this is interesting. On the opening, when we were here, a moth came in and started to circle the painting. And if I left a group of people to their devices, I think what you'd find is that they kind of, end up standing around the fire, because it's so part of our DNA, it's part of our eyes, and our evolution.
I think Marissa has one.
Yes,
Oh.
so last year, because I'm very taken by the work that Spencer does, this is from last year's show, and it was one of my favorite pieces. And it got a lot of attention because inside of the piece are a lot of animals, and he can explain to you his feeling about it, but as a gallery owner, I want to tell you what it meant to me. And when I saw it, I saw all these animals watching their friend, and their friend was actually a tiger in the fire, because that's what I saw. And that's not what Spencer had in mind at all. But being that we see things differently, I mean, because if you really pay attention to this piece, and it is my favorite of last year's show, there is at least 15 animals that are hiding within here, watching with their sad faces what's going on. I come from Louisiana, so we deal with water problems due to climate change. But in 2023, 60,000 acres burned because it's so hot. And so I really appreciate his work. I appreciate what he does. I normally have, the gallery often has shows different things. They don't really necessarily tell a story like this. And I think that everybody needs to take time, if it's just from a strike of a match, a candle, a fire, and really see how we and what we do every single day can affect our environment and our climate. So there you go.
Yeah, this piece is called The Howling, and it's representative of, my nature series, which I'm still doing, by the way. And see, the animals are looking at what? It's a man-made fire, but there's no man there. So then it's like, why not? Where's man? It's irresponsible. It's indicative that there's an irresponsibility, and that the animals have come around. And there's also some subliminal messaging. There's crimes against nature that very few people see, and I like to do those kind of surprises through the piece.
That's great. Jamie, what piece of art, and maybe it's one we've already talked about, what piece of art speaks to you and why is it? And do you have a question for Spencer about it?
What was that one?
So why does it speak to you?
I was drawn to this one too. One, because the scale is really different. All the rest of them are very like up close, and then this one was the only one that was landscape. So clearly, I picked out that it didn't belong, I guess. But
If you look at his other art on his website,
yes.
you'll see the living birds.
Yeah.
I noticed the
And the
spiral.
swirls are still there.
The spiral.
Yeah, the swirls are still there, and the element of fire actually brings it to this collection too. But I was drawn to this one in particular. It's interesting the trees, how angular you made the trees. I'm curious, is that on purpose to contrast the swirls, or how?
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
every piece.
Maybe I minored it.
You can have artists do it.
I want every piece to be the best, you know. So every time I paint, if somebody asks me what's my favorite painting, it's the next one. And I'm always trying to develop and look at things from a different point of view. And so even if you look at all the smoke through the pieces, like almost everyone's different. You know, there's an evolution to it that is interesting to me. If I did, you know, a show of only one thing with different sizes and all of that, it just wouldn't be interesting, more challenging. So I don't have an answer for it. It's the only one I've ever done like that, and the trees like that. So each one is unique, but tells the same kind of, you know, story about man's impact on the world.
Speaking of what's next, you talked about your favorite painting is always your next one. What do you have around the corner, Spencer?
There's some really exciting new work that's coming. At least I'm excited about it. It's more pointed. It's more focused.
And I would argue this is more pointed than perhaps the
is.
last work. So it's a progressive.
It is. So it is a progression. But also what I want to do is start to bring nature to collide with combustion. And how I do that, well, you just have to come back in a year or two.
So before we get to questions from you in the audience, I want to end in our discussion. What is giving you hope right now?
It's a tough time. And generally, I am a total optimist about most things. That's my wife. But the one thing I will tell you in looking toward the future, because artists are commentators and visionaries, if you will, on what's happening. And I'll say that the one thing I absolutely know is it's going to get worse before it gets better, if it gets better. There's a lot of slack in the line. And I demonstrate that in the final piece of the collection, which is called Snuff. And Snuff is the little piece right there next to the candle. And Snuff is about putting out the candle, putting out the combustion, solving the problems, but you still have the smoke. You still have the residual impacts that are going to be prevalent for a long time. I mean, the oceans are saturated, pollution, all that stuff. So what gives me hope is actually the people in this room. It's like people who are interested. When I travel around and give artist talk or meet people, and the young people come, and they're wanting to talk about the issue. It's their world. And in that respect, you know, I think it's a groundswell movement. And I expect that in terms of art, that there will be more and more art. There is environmental art today. It's kind of splotchy. It's kind of here and there. Sustainable materials have been used, but I haven't seen anybody really talking about this. And I hope that, you know, my work can help people develop a conversation about what's happening and more awareness. And so that's what gives me hope, is to express myself through this work.
Jamie, what about you?
I was telling Marissa and folks earlier that this is a tough field to be in right now. It's not the most uplifting, but I think what gives me hope is young people as well. But I'll tell a story around this because when I've done youth work in the past around climate change in particular, there's a lot of anxiety and there's a lot of fear. There's also a lot of folks that feel powerless and feel like I'm not old enough to vote, can't do anything there, no one listens to me, adults don't listen to me. And yet there are some who are really saying, I'm going to take action anyway, and I'm going to do something about it. And sometimes we don't know what that little action might ripple out to. So in just 10 years ago, it feels like not that long ago, but just 10 years ago, when I was doing youth work, I would have some of my youth would come up to me and beg for change to be able to take the bus home afterwards because they didn't get a free bus pass from school. They had, if you lived more than 2 miles from the school, then you got a bus pass. But if you were 1.99 miles, you did not get a bus pass. And that meant that those youth couldn't get to an after-school program or to an after-school job, or like there were limited opportunities. Not everyone had a parent that could pick them up after school, right? And there were high school students at Rainier Beach High School who said, this is not fair. And some of us, 2 miles in Rainier Beach is really different from 2 miles in other places in the city. And if it's a dark winter night, I'm probably going to skip school and then go. And so they said they worked with their teachers. And they got together and they organized and said, we want bus passes, we want transit, and we promise our attendance will go up. And then our grades will go up because we're attending more classes. And then maybe graduation rates will go up because we've been able to attend more classes and are getting better grades. And because they organized, they were able to get a pilot. They were able to get kids on free and reduced lunch. You're gonna get free bus passes only at this school, and we're gonna see what happens. And it was wildly successful. And because of that, there was an expansion of that. There were folks that said, there were other students from other schools that said, what about us? Let's try this. And within a few years, you had all students on free and reduced lunch were able to get free bus passes. And then Seattle Public Schools was like, okay, we'll do 1 mile away from the school instead of 2 miles. And it just started to gain momentum across the city. And then we had the Seattle Transportation Levy passed, and that funded across the entire city. And then we had all students, and it was all students regardless of income even. And this is now not that long ago, now we're talking like 2018. And then other places across the region were like, well, what about us? Like, what about us in Kent? What about us in Spokane? What about like young people everywhere? And that started to gain momentum as well, to the point that when the Climate Commitment Act passed, some of that funding actually funds free youth bus passes across the entire state of Washington, as of just a few years ago. And when you think about it, this started with just a handful of high school students. That one school saying, just our students here in this school, and having no idea that what they started there would ripple out to now having a statewide program that's supporting young people across the entire state. And you get folks that are like, there's all the data that shows if you ride public transit as a young person, you're more likely to ride as an adult, so it's a climate solution, right? And so I tell that to adults as well, that you never know when sometimes the smallest thing you're tackling might result in a big impact.
That's a great anecdote and an example of how change can ripple out to have a big impact. Thank you for that. We're going to go to questions, so please, if you can ask your question in the form of a question, we can try to get to a few. So raise your hand if you have a question.
Sorry.
Oh, come on in.
That's my buddy.
Yes, come on in.
That's my buddy.
Across our country in terms of climate policy, recognition of climate change, and do something about it. How is that?
That's great. Jamie, go ahead.
That's a great question. I'm going to answer that kind of bigger picture, which is right now California and Washington both have a cap and trade law, and we're right now in the process of creating what we call linkage, which is like linking the two programs together. But it's created momentum across other states too. Of everyone was watching us. Everyone was watching us, both when the Climate Commitment Act passed, but also last year when Initiative 2117 happened, that if it had passed, would have repealed the Climate Commitment Act, and it would have also made it so that we could not replace it. It was going to ban any other future tax on carbon that was put forward. And so it was going to be hugely detrimental. We had folks in our national office just like on calls with us being like, we're watching what's happening here as a microcosm for whether or not climate policy can even happen in this country. Because, you know, are we just going to pass things and then it will get repealed? And we successfully defeated 2117 last year. The Nature Conservancy put a ton of effort into it. And the messaging that we used, the campaign used, wasn't like, you know, we have to tackle climate change and here's how. It was, this is investing in your public transit system. This is investing in your in the infrastructure in your community. This is like examples of projects that were already happening and invested across the entire state. And that's what resonated with people. And it wasn't close. It was we won clearly by like 2/3 of the vote. And I think that
Financial support from oil and gas companies.
yes, surprisingly.
After they fought it the first time.
Yeah, that's a whole other story. But I think that is a reason for hope, and it's also something that that the rest of the country is looking at us, because right now local action is where things are going to move the needle, and there's a lot of states that are looking to implement their own climate policies.
Another question?
How is your the paintings you're doing this year and last year? How has that impacted your perception of your garden and your beautiful bonsais? And is there a back and forth, a dialogue that's happened as a result of digging into these issues?
That's a great
Are
question,
you setting
Stuart.
fires?
No, but all these artistic forms, because the garden is just a different medium. And in a prior life, I was a product designer, and I look for harmony in every product. So it's something that like runs through me. So I think it's more the fact that, can you find the Japanese garden in here? In the simplicity and the stillness and the composition, and so it's all about spiritual development. So absolutely.
Great. Mike, and then Jeff, and then I think we have time for 2 more questions.
First, buddy. Thanks. I love the conversation about how we are partnering with other entities to try and bring this forward. In Washington, one of the unique things I always found was with a relationship with PACCAR or with Weyerhaeuser or these other areas that really impact the overall environment and how we run our state. I'm very curious to see, like, how do you interact with them? What's the overall goal? I know what I can do, but how do we work with some of the larger players in the market?
With PACCAR specifically, or
Well, no, I'm thinking of like, I go, well, Weyerhaeuser,
yeah.
one of the largest paper producers, these others.
Yeah.
And I completely agree with you with the fact that, like, when you look at things, it's like fire is good, it can also be bad, and these other things. So how do you work with them to regulate their production? How do you work with PACCAR with their emissions and these others, because they control like 70% of like the trucking industry. So
Yeah.
it's just like, you know.
Yeah, and I might answer that from the Nature Conservancy is one environmental organization amongst many, and for some of this we have to do a coalition.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are a part of a lot of different coalitions that are tackling different pieces and different relationships and different people. So we have We're part of the Environmental Priorities Coalition. We are a part of a couple, like a recreation coalition, a land conservancy coalition. So there's a lot of different groups that, and I think the power that TNC often has is as a convener, because we span across the spectrum. We have relationships across the spectrum. And so that's often the role we're playing, is to bring folks to the table to have those conversations. And then I think to like specific like corporate partnerships, that might be something Paul, you have more information about that we can get back to you on. But I think like in terms of how we approach policy, we're always thinking about what is feasible, because there is that balance between making sure that folks like can stay in business and also retain jobs in the region, but while also holding them accountable to emissions and what they're producing. And so we're also like in a lot of those conversations and making sure we're doing our science and our research and talking to different legislators before we're advocating for something.
So Paul or Jeff can fight over the last question, but we will have time after we conclude the formal program. I think I don't want to speak for Jamie and Spencer too much, but I think they'll stick around for more conversation.
I mean, honestly, Mike's kind of covered mine a little bit. Like Spencer, some of your art touches on the juxtaposition between business and climate. And I'm a businessman who actually believes in climate change. And but I have run into several places that I've looked at, especially in Washington, where we are trying to build and do things to reduce the impact of climate change in restaurants and all different kinds of businesses across the spectrum, right? Which makes it almost unable to be in business in some cases. And so that idea, I think, is a bit of a flaw in the argument sometimes, is that I don't hear enough discussed on that level of how do you, because I see it here with what you're doing here, like you must have experienced it while you were painting that painting of that rocket or that airplane, and tying it into how you felt about climate change, which is such a huge thing in business right now too. Like to put a duct in a new business right now, into a new restaurant, is $600,000 in Washington, in Seattle specifically, because we're building to codes that only 3 companies in the city build to right now. So it's great. Everybody wants to do that, but nobody could open a restaurant because to make $600,000 back, you won't do it.
I hear you. Look, I'm a businessman too.
Right. So
and
I'm just interested in your
my take on that. Yeah. So, I hope my work sparks a conversation. There's not a lot of simple answers.
Right.
For instance, we can't get off of fossil fuels tomorrow. I mean, we have plastics and energy requirements and more energy. I mean, there's a whole transition. So there's a lot of those type of issues where, urbanization is colliding with nature and what's happening. I mean, and it's difficult through regulatory and political and all kinds of things. But maybe TNC has a point of view on that as well.
I think the nature of policy is there's never a perfect policy. And so it's always something that has to be iterated on and has to be tweaked and modified, and like things are put in place and you're like, actually this is how it's impacting all these things. I think an example, I think of one of my early jobs several decades ago at this point, was working in indoor air quality. And it was the era of weatherization. There was a ton of money out there for energy efficiency to like tighten up homes. And I worked on reservations and tribal reservations in Western Washington and Oregon. And we were tightening up these homes and making them and the bills were going down. It was so great. But then there was a spike of asthma attacks and ER visits and at the clinics, and it turns out everyone's using wood stoves as their primary heat source, and we were tightening up all these homes and then trapping all of the pollutants inside, And of course, like at the time, it's like folks are thinking, I'm thinking energy efficiency. We need to like reduce this so that we can make it as efficient as possible. And when we have folks that are kind of in their silo, in their zone, not thinking about how that interacts with other aspects, whether it's health, or jobs, or people, then we make bad policy. And so I think part of it too is being able to like come back at it and say, how do we make this better? And working with folks in these positions to change things so that it does work for people.
In our final moment together up here talking, I want to ask a quick last fun question. In one sentence, what's the first thing that pops into your head when you think about how you enjoy nature?
Who's first?
Whoever thinks of it first.
Oh.
In my garden. Pruning away, losing myself, and feeling nature in its glory.
Jamie?
I grew up in the ocean, and I was in the ocean probably 5 or 6 days a week. And so for me, it's like imagining yourself floating in salt water. And I go back home every once in a while, and I've noticed the water is warmer. Like it's actually warmer, disconcertingly so. And I see the impacts that are happening every day, and that's what keeps me going to try to do this work.
I want to say thank you to Jamie and Spencer, and I will hand it over to Paul for some final remarks.
Okay. How about a applause?